What's your definition? I ask this to every speaker who joins me in these
Okay.
sessions because
Mhm.
it's interesting to hear personal definitions of this.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the first question. And second is, has it evolved over time for you as you began to work over these projects?
Okay, sure. So I know while there are several definitions available for gamification, right? So for me, it is all about changing the user behavior, right? From being unmotivated to being more motivated and being more interested in completing a task. And honestly, gamification is not rocket science. It's been there for ages, right? Just that we are adding some more dynamics and mechanics and making it more sophisticated these days. So I would like to, like a very simple example, like a day-to-day example of real life gamification. So if you have a child and if you tell your child, you finish your dinner and I'll give you a candy or I'll give you a dessert, or you finish this and I'll buy you a gift, you're already gamifying, right? Because you're
Right,
you're making the child finish a task and then you're rewarding the child for completing the task. That is like the base of gamification. That is not the entire gamification, but there are these behavior charts available that they put up, and then they give stars for good behavior. You brush your teeth, you put 5 stars. So that is like your dashboard. And if you have 2 3 children and if you put all their scores right next to each other, that becomes a leaderboard. It is as simple as that. But then it is not just that. If you were to implement the same, understanding the user types, understanding the mechanics and dynamics and aesthetics of gamification in a nice platform or an application, that becomes a completely gamified application for you, right?
right.
So
And I want to pause and ask a question, Nitya. I've heard you now mention several times these two words like mechanics and dynamics.
right.
Right. So, what are those? What's a very simple way of understanding those terms?
So mechanics are your points, your levels, your badges, your leaderboards, and likes,
Right.
right? And your
Okay.
dynamics are the actual reward, your status, the mastery that you get, your achievement, altruism. All
Right.
this becomes your dynamics. Aesthetics is like a top layer, which is
Mm-hmm.
your narrative, your storyboard, right? So
Right.
which is what makes gamified applications more interesting. But it's a different thing. So your aesthetics also could be your UI, because you make your UI very intuitive and all that. But then
Right.
your narrative and storyline, what I have, because you also asked me how gamification has evolved in the recent years, right? From the time I started gamifying, which was like 10 years ago, to now, I think it has grown in leaps and bounds. To an extent, there's gamification, or there's a small aspect of gamification in almost every application that you don't even notice that it is already gamified.
Ubiquitous. Right. It's,
Right, yes. So you don't even know. I think that's the success as well. So gone are days when they were heavily dependent on themes and storylines and narratives. Now it has become more subtle, more generic, and more neutral. So, for example, a Swiggy or a GP or anything, so they don't really have a storyline to it. So
I
GPay
think
has this
we have
building.
some we have some viewers who might not be from India. So
Mhm.
just to help
Yeah,
them
yeah,
understand, GPay is Google Pay, and the version of that app in India has a lot of gamification elements integrated into it. For example, every time you make a payment using Google Pay, it unlocks scratch cards. It helps you to complete a home. It helps you to build a home and collect various cute things, in and around festival times. So that's just
yeah,
a background.
yeah. Yeah, for people who are outside of India, even Amazon has gamification now. You spin, you answer questions, you get rewarded. So you can't really imagine anything without gamification. So when you think user experience, you also think gamification, because it has become a part of user experience. If you want to enhance user experience, enhance adoption, enhance compliance, you definitely incorporate at least some elements of gamification into your application.
So, because you mentioned a very good word, user experience, in the context of enterprise gamification, that would translate into terms like employee experience or learner experience,
Yes,
right?
yes, exactly. So
So
you
people who are working on improving those things in companies would naturally find gamification to be an ally. Right?
absolutely.
Perfect, perfect. And Nitya, the question that I asked you about the evolution, it was actually about your definition. Has your perspective changed of gamification, or has it kind of remained stable over the last 10 years?
No, I think it is definitely changed. It is. I wouldn't say it is being stable at all. So it is from my observation that I said that it is there everywhere, right?
Hmm.
And especially with the advent of a lot of AR, VR, and Metaverse, right? You can't imagine anything without gamification in future. So,
Right.
so some aspect of gamification is certainly going to be there.
So I'll put a question to you now. It's like a make or break question, right? For many people who are still considering whether gamification is for them or not. If you had to if you had to just answer in yes or no to this question, what would your answer be? The question is, do you think everyone who is working in an enterprise in roles where they are going to influence the work of many people, including making their experience better, do you think they should learn enterprise gamification or they should not?
I mean, learning enterprise gamification, I don't know if that is the right thing, right? So they will have to at least be aware of how gamification works so they can decide based on the context if they really want to apply these in their. You see, it need not actually be a developing a platform or an application, right? It can even be a mix of online offline experience. Like I said, you give your candy, you give a candy to a child and try and it is a real life gamification scenario, and that
Right.
applies to a lot of your employee engagement activities. You could just take cues from all these mechanics and then you could implement it even offline, and it can be a combination of online and offline as well, depending on the budget that is available in your organization, the resources available, and the time and money, everything matters, right? So
Yes.
you could just strike a balance between offline, online, how much to gamify, what all to gamify. I think that is where a lot of user research comes into play.
Right. So in fact, that brings me to my next question on the more practical considerations.
Hmm.
Um, what's the most practical way to get started? Suppose somebody has the desire to start using enterprise gamification techniques in their company. What would be the most practical starting point for those people?
See, the first step to solving any problem or building any product or an application for that matter is being a design thinking practitioner, right? So it is very important to understand the problem and to define the problem statement. Sometimes we assume a problem and start developing something and then realize that it is not successful because you were not really solving the right problem in the first place. The first step
Right.
is for anybody, any product owner, is to understand the problem. If at all it exists, and if it does, what is the problem? So you define your problem and then understand the user, right? So here, the player. So there is this Bartle's player types, and there is a test available, a questionnaire that people could take, and then you get the response. But otherwise, in a large enterprise, there is sure that there'll be all these player types anywhere. So there's
Right.
this seekers, achievers, explorers, and socializers. So I'm sure there will be a mix of all of them. So you will have to cater to the needs of all these player types. And it is extremely important to understand who you're gamifying for, because in an enterprise, an application can be used by an entry level employee to the CIO or CXO of the company,
Right.
right? It could be a fresher or it could be a CEO or a CIO. So how are
Right.
you going to balance it, right? So there
Mhm.
could be applications which are predominantly used by managers and above. So it could be your expense bill submission, right? So mostly people who travel are going to be at a manager's level or above. So when you are gamifying an application like that, you will need to know how much to gamify. It is very important to know, you need to strike that balance and draw a line. Just imagine a CIO or a CEO logging into your application and then they complete a task and there is a pop-up saying, wow, you've done a great job. I don't think they're going to appreciate that, because they are not there to see that, they're not there to play a game. It
Right.
could be a very subtle gamification where you just have some progress bar or something on top. If they want to take a look at it, they could do that.
Right.
Whereas if you were building an onboarding platform for freshers, you definitely can go full on and do everything that you want, because they have all the time and they are the people who would love to have a narrative, a storyline, like literally playing a game,
Right.
right? I
I
think
get you.
this balance is something that is extremely important when gamifying an application in the enterprise context.
Right. So we should, the point is that you have to go talk to the people and make sure that what's the right level of comfort they have for all these mechanics and for the visual or the aesthetic part of gamification, right? The example that you talked about, the CXO level example, is pretty on point because most of them would not really find it um, all that nice to see those, a lot of bling and lot of
Yeah,
color and movement on the screen. But
because they don't have the time for all that. They want to quickly go finish their task and then continue.
right, right. Also, I want to ask you, is there a difference in how you would look at a problem if you came to realize that, or let me put it this way, there are two systems. Let's talk about system one and system two. System one, for example, is an occasional system that somebody just maybe visits for maybe a couple of minutes in a month, right? Maybe just uploading an expense bill or something, which is just take a photo of the bill and just upload it into the system and you're done. Compare that with a system two where you spend a significant amount of time. Maybe you spend a couple of hours on a daily basis. Right? How does this factor play into the decision making? Uh, how do you see that matter?
So you're asking how much would you gamify these two systems?
Yes, because the task durations are very, very different in both these cases. So how would that play into the decision making, right? We don't need to have any hard and fast rule, but how would that influence the decision making is something that probably might mean something to our viewers.
Right. So, for example, on one hand, you were talking about an expense bill submission, right? So,
Right.
even though somebody is going to spend only, say, 2 or 3 minutes, it is not a 2 or 3 minutes task. I have done that several times, though, but it is not something that you do on a daily basis. At least you don't log into that every day, right? So, even though it is not something that you log in every day, there should be enough motivation for somebody to go and perform that task, because it is very important to finish that task,
Right.
right? So I would like to talk about Fogg's behavior model here. While there are a lot of frameworks available, there is Octalysis framework, there is Mark Zowski's framework. There's several frameworks available. So when we developed a platform, we did take inspiration from all of these, but we really did not follow any of these frameworks completely because it is difficult to have one template that can fit all needs, right? But one thing that can definitely work is your behavior model by fog, because so you need to make the platform or the application not too difficult and not too easy to accomplish a task. So hitting that sweet spot is what is important, irrespective of the number of hours or number of days you spend on the platform, right? So if you can hit that sweet spot, anything is going to work well for you, in my opinion. Right? So because these 2 hours that you spend on a particular application might not be as critical as that 2 or 3 minutes that a person spends on that other system one that you were talking about.
Right. So the
Context, yeah,
criticality of the task.
yes, exactly. Because your context is very, very important, which is why understanding the problem is the most important part of gamifying anything. And then the user type, like I mentioned. You
Uh,
can get that sweet spot. I think it is
can
a
you
win.
talk to us about that model, Nithya, the FOGS model?
Yeah. So the Fogg's model is, so there's a formula which is behavior is equal to motivation into ability into trigger, right? So
Hmm.
the if the task is too simple, right, and if the motivation is too high, it is not going to work. Again, if it is too difficult but the motivation is high, again it is not going to work. So there should be enough motivation, and the task should also be neither too difficult nor too easy to achieve that sweet spot. So how do you achieve that? Is it very easy? No, it is definitely not easy, which is why we usually develop any application in a lean startup methodology. So we also follow MVP framework, where you identify the minimum viable product, and you only release those key features in your first release. And then as you unlock the next stages or you upgrade the application, you add or delete some of these features.
Right.
So which is where your data and analytics come into play. Without that, you're not going to understand the user behavior.
Right.
And that is the key to the success of any application or a product. Having a very strong backend data analytics tool, which can give you exactly how much time a user spends on a particular task, what is that they want to do, what is that they like, what is that they don't like. So all these data will help you in deciding in your next release what is that you have to include, what is that you have to remove, what is that you have to change, and all this. So I think readily available platforms like even Upshot, for example, can be a great addition for any organization which wants to gamify their application.
So
That is a very
you
critical part.
you talk about a very important topic, which I also believe is extremely important, which is numbers driven decision making, right? So I think it's safe enough to say that anyone who really wants to try out gamification should look at it maybe like they're trying out any new thing, right? When you try any new thing in terms of product or technology, you would really want to keep your eyes on the numbers, right? It's almost like you've got one eye on making the improvements and tweaking, and another eye on how are the numbers reflecting, how are they changing,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And I've seen some excellent gamification concepts, really go 6 feet under because there was not enough emphasis on regular analytics and
Yes,
regular checking of analytics, or the analytics were basically useful only up to a point where they could answer only a few high level questions, but beyond that, if you wanted to go drill down really deep, you did not have enough firepower there. So you
Yeah.
touched on, I think, a really important point. So does it mean that when you start, let's shift gears to talk a little bit about technology, right? Because you brought it up very naturally in the course of the conversation. What kind of technologies would a gamification project team need at the minimum in your experience?
I think a very good UX team,
Good
right?
UX team, okay?
Yeah, because your UI UX is the key, right?
Hmm.
But it has to be very intuitive. And so we developed it on ASP.NET. I'm not a techie though, right? But yeah, so we developed it on ASP.NET. But I think a lot of technology, and so this is where I would say, because my organization was big enough to have their own employees develop a full-fledged platform, it was easy. Otherwise, if you can, I would suggest buying a platform or a plugin and then customize it to your need.
Right,
I think that's the best thing to do, um, given the need for data and analytics, like we just spoke about, right?
right.
Because I have seen many, even within the organization, enterprise applications, some of them failed because we were not able to track that data in the backend.
I see. Okay.
So even when you fail, right, you need to know why you failed. Otherwise, you're not going to improve. You will have
Right,
no clue what went wrong. And building a completely homegrown AI, or sorry, data analytics platform is very difficult for a smaller organization or for a non-technology based organization. So, which is
right.
why buying something and then customizing it is the easiest way to go about if somebody is wanting to do it in a shorter span of time.
And typically, how big do you think the team would have to be to get started? Maybe that could also be weighing on some of the people's minds. Like, oh, I would love to do something. I have a small setup. I have a small team. Maybe not very high budgets. So, is there a way for such
So,
people also to do something?
absolutely. So my team, so I have had a team of 20 people to even 6 people,
Okay.
right? So one business analyst to gather your requirements, do the user research and all that. And then depending on how, the skill set of the developers, you will need definitely 2 to 3 developers. So we always had full stack developers. So full stack developers are those who can do your UI and also do the actual coding, backend, everything. So that way it was easy because we had full stack developers.
Hmm.
And definitely somebody to test it. Testing is the key. And the early you test, the early you fail, the better.
Right.
Right? Because when you follow agile methodology, because we're talking technology and all that, I think MVP framework with agile methodology is definitely going to help you.
Right. And they also say, right, bad news should travel fast,
Right.
faster than good news.
Yes. And a
Um,
good designer, visual designer.
Visual
If your
design.
application demands a lot of a theme and narrative, if you're going to have like a space based application, you will need somebody to design all those nice looking screens.
Right. So talk a little bit about narratives, Nithya. I think you mentioned that word a few times. So what are narratives in the context of enterprise gamification, and when and why do they matter?
So let us take an example of an e-learning platform, or let's say an onboarding platform, right? So these are platforms where I think you could definitely try a narrative. So I was heading this, I was program managing this initiative where we had interns from various colleges across India forming teams and then logging into this platform and then competing with each other and building their own application. Everything happened on the platform. So, if you have to make this interesting, you could keep it very sober, very subtle, but is that going to excite millennials? I don't think so. So we have tried various formats. We had IPL theme, and then we had a space theme, and then we had a time travel theme. So we used to call our session, I mean, discussions and sessions is game storming sessions. That is the
Game storming.
game storming, like a brainstorming, like a game storm.
Got it.
We
Right.
get into a room and then we discuss every other Hollywood movie where you go and save the world, save the planet, because those are all places where you get inspiration from. And when we did the time travel theme, we literally had to learn about the Mayan civilization, about the coldest place on earth and whatnot, right? It is to that extent that we drill down and do research before we even pick a theme, and then we start building on top of it. So when you say you're going to save the world, everybody gets excited for some reason or the other. So you feel empowered, and then you create your avatar, and then you start fighting for saving the world, or you want to travel back in time to do some change in like 2000 BC, and then come back and then you save the world. So all that you could try, given the users have that enthusiasm, they are young, they have the time to do this. But if I would implement the same in a serious business context, definitely no.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So, because you asked about narrative, this is how a narrative could be, and UX writing plays a great role as well. So, your narrative should be very short, very interesting, very crisp, and it should just blend. It shouldn't stand separately. And you should again know how much to themify or gamify, and how much of a story element to add, and where to add, where not to add. So I've seen instances where we tried to implement this in some business scenarios and it did not work, because we knew that this internship was one time thing. They start,
Mhm.
they finish, and that is it. Imagine
Mhm.
you log in every day and then you see the same thing. You get bored of it.
Right. Of course.
So
Yeah.
your sheet is going to be there as long as you are an employee of that organization. And if you see the same team, same thing on a daily basis, you're not going to get excited. And again, somebody might like cricket, somebody might hate cricket. You can't take chances there. So keep it very neutral, very generic when it comes
Right.
to such enterprise scenarios.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, there are some things that you could still have a narrative for. Most of the organizations have this. So what do you call the? So you go green initiatives.
Right.
So where you plant tree and you volunteer for all this. So there, just imagine you log in and you volunteer. There is a dying tree which just blooms. Very subtle, but then it makes you smile.
Right.
So this is a narrative. This is a storyline, a very subtle storyline that you could incorporate in most of the applications.
So I think when you say narratives, you're basically saying let's put people into the setting of a story and let's give them roles and let's them watch as they try to live those roles. Right.
That's what Metaverse is happening right now, right? That's exactly what you're doing on Metaverse. You create your avatar and then you go and have your meeting in Italy, in Switzerland, while you're still at home. It's just an
I don't know.
extension of all this.
I don't know if that's meant to make people feel good or feel like they're not in Venice.
I know, but then that's how the future is going to be, I believe.
Yes, yes, of course. At least virtually in Italy sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Um, let's talk about one very important ingredient, which I think is underappreciated and not very widely understood, which is management support. For instance, suppose somebody who is watching this webinar now or later, let's say, or they read a really interesting book on gamification, and their eyes light up and they are full of enthusiasm and they want to go out and do something. They will face a fall. formidable hurdle more often than not, which takes the form of I have to convince my superiors. And some of them might not be caring for anything that even remotely smells of fun, because maybe they are really set in their ways and they think like it's got to be serious for it to be business, right? These are some really deep and underlying uh, thought patterns, or I don't know if we can call them biases, but right, they have those pretty strong thoughts. So how do people go and open up the management's mind to doing something of this kind?
Sure. See, sometimes there is this misconception that gamification is always about only fun and it is always like a game, while it can also be that, right? Like
I
I
see.
said,
Right.
if it is done the right way, the way it has to be, or to the limit that you really set, it need not necessarily be that very fun and vibrant thing at all. Let us just look into LinkedIn, for example. LinkedIn had this progress bars, which most of us would not even notice. As you complete your profile, it just says you've completed so much. That is, progress bar is a game element. But then on LinkedIn, you don't feel it. You don't feel like it is gamified. It is just like a it's just like a tool that shows you've completed so much. So there are different flavors to gamification. I think when you talk to your superiors or when you talk to the management, it is important to throw some facts and figures and show how many people have actually benefited by gamifying their applications. So what is the success rate of it?
Right.
And you cannot measure it without trying it. You will have to start somewhere, right? So start small. A lean startup is definitely recommended. If they don't have the budget, then they could recommend having an online offline scenario. So in my previous organization, so I was also playing the role of Yammer community manager. So I've played
Okay.
several roles in my previous organization. So this was also one of them. So where we had to do some employee engagement activities, but
Hmm.
Yammer is not heavily gamified. So how do you bring in that balance, right?
Right.
So we
Hmm.
did offline activities and then made people post them on Yammer.
Right.
It was quite a tedious task because sometimes we had to manually in the backend see who has posted it first and then
Right.
announce them as the winner and create a manual leaderboard dashboard and post it like a picture. So these are the top 5 users for this week, right? So you could get some amount of data in the backend in an Excel sheet. So this is like manually gamifying something.
Got it.
So
I think
you could
that's a terrific idea. Yeah.
so you could try something like this, show the results. Hey,
Right.
we are doing something only offline or only in a different place, but now we have tried something that is more exciting for the employees, and you see the rate of adoption, see the rate of compliance, and
Right.
people are liking it.
Right.
So why not actually spend that time and money in developing something small and offering it to the employees? So this could be an option that they could try.
I think this is phenomenal, Nithya. Thank you for that idea, because it's like a breakthrough, right? Suddenly you go, I actually don't need any investment. I
Yes,
don't need any, all I need is spirit and the enthusiasm to do something with my hands that normally technology would do in another company, right? For example, the calculations of who are the top users, or who's gotten what kind of a level in a certain task, right? Are they a beginner level or an intermediate level or a pro level? So these kind of things, normally technology helps us to do that, right? It kind of because this is boring and this is beyond a certain point, human beings don't really enjoy these things. But in the absence of technology, I think to validate the concept, a person must do these things.
yes.
the enterprise gamification enthusiast must go ahead and do these things manually and watch the reactions of people, right?
Yes, exactly.
And if there is hope in that reaction, then you can always start a conversation around saying, look here, I've basically taken extra a couple of hours extra apart from my work schedule to do this. Wouldn't it be nice if we had technology to do all this for us?
Yes. At
That's a
least they would
great point.
have a serious thought.
Yes, because they've already received the results of something, um, and there was no investment for it. It was just a person going out there with all their heart and creativity and doing something for the organization and showing results. I think that also packs a lot of punch in front of the leadership, because it 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 very much aligns with that usual definition of a great employee, right? Who goes beyond the call of duty and does something and shows that spark and that kind of a creativity.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a really really great idea, and I think I would really strongly encourage our viewers to try this approach out in your organizations. If you don't have budgets, don't let that stop you. Okay, we will shift gears to resources. Do you want to recommend any resources to our viewers uh, to get them started and or to keep them going on this journey?
Sure. See, there are several books and blogs and websites available to understand what gamification is. So gamification.co has been there since the time like 2011. That was like the one-stop shop for us when we started gamifying. They conduct a lot of webinars and seminars and all that. So that is one place that they can go and look at. And LinkedIn has a lot of groups. That is the
Okay,
best with these thought leaders and experts in gamification, right? Because otherwise you're not going to get to see what they are actually talking about. So these LinkedIn groups are a great source for getting the required information to learn gamification. And I think it's important for anyone to understand just the basics of gamification and see what are the different dynamics, mechanics before they can think about gamifying anything. And there is gamification toolkit, which could be a great book for beginners. And then there is actionable gamification by Yu Kai Chow. And just understand the different frameworks available. You implement it or not is different, but just try and see what is out there.
I think they'll give you good starting points. I agree
Yeah.
with you that we don't have to strictly follow each framework, because these frameworks are like codified wisdom, right? Somebody has understood something and they are just sharing their wisdom in the form of a framework. It's not meant for literal application, right?
Just to
So
get inspired from and see.
inspired from,
Yes, get inspired, because they also talk about where they've used case studies are a great way to learn,
right,
depending the so is it for a retail, is it for BFS, banking financial system? So everywhere it is different. Retail e-commerce is completely a different ball game altogether, right? You
right,
could do anything and everything there. So
right.
enterprise gamification is different. So there are several case studies available. I think that is the best way to see if there is a problem that you have. There could be someone who has already solved it,
Right.
he implemented it. So you could take inspiration from there and see how you can build on top of that or change it and tweak it to your needs.
Right. With that, Nitya, let's move to Q&A. So we have a few questions here. I think one of the questions is from Archita. She says, Nitya, any red flags you've seen while implementing gamification in an enterprise?
So see, red flags, I again, like I said, some of the applications have backfired because we went a little overboard,
Hmm?
and I don't think we should have done so much. it could have been slightly subtle, right? So that happens. And like I said, we have done we have sometimes got some theme into an application, and it becomes very monotonous and boring beyond a point.
Right.
Unless you keep changing it, and changing it is not that easy.
Yeah.
Not keep working on it all the time. So those were some things that you have to definitely keep in mind. And so in the very initial stages, like I said, we did not have any data analytics, so that
Mm.
didn't go well. So we had to develop something. Again, we could not do a great job at it, but we did have a backend support for us to check what is happening. So I can't really think of any other red flags unless you don't do a proper user research and you don't solve the right problem the right way.
Of course, that's a weak foundation to start with if those are not in place. But I think the 2 points from your answer, the red flags are probably um, lack of good analytic support is one, and second is too much gamification, which
That's
is
where that's a very tricky part. You get so excited and you put in everything, then it doesn't work.
right. They say right, too much of a good thing is bad. So I think it needs to be calibrated. Probably that's the most essential thing. Constantly talk to people and say, is this enough? Is this enough? It also reminds me of games, Nitya. Games are some of those things which keep people engaged for years, right? It's because there is always something new happening. There is always something to deal with, some fire to put out, some enemy to kill,
Yeah.
and the settings change. You are right now near the shore of a sea, and now suddenly you are in the mountains, and there is so much of change that you never feel that sort of stagnation, right?
So unless you can do that change, right? If you gamify too much, it is definitely going to backfire.
And I think I can add one pointer in this is that even if you implement gamification without any themes or without any overt or very strong themes, I think keeping a close eye on how people are responding to the current set of rules would help, because you can always make certain things harder and other things easier. You can
Yeah.
keep tweaking,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. I think
And
having a rule engine,
mhm,
right? We call it the rule engine. So in the back end, you can change. You
yep,
can change the you can make it more complex or you can make it more easy. You can introduce new things like quests. So many things that you can introduce, right? So those are things that can keep you motivated for a longer time.
yes. So in one word, freshness. Keep things fresh.
Yes.
Perfect. The next question is from Pujita, and she asks, as you mentioned about gamifying the onboarding process, what could be the other areas to gamify in a workplace?
Okay.
That's an interesting question.
So e-learning is one aspect. So there are so many trainings that
Hmm?
any employee might have to take.
True.
And imagine sitting through some video, going through the video, and then taking an assessment, which is just question and answers that you have to pick.
Right.
Rather, that was gamified. And if you could meet the other learners and see what they are learning. So, one key aspect that we introduced when we realized we had to cater to all player types is altruism.
Right.
So, can you share your knowledge? So, there was a discussion forum in the platform where anybody can come and post questions on technology that they were working on, building their application on. Not many will go and help them,
Mhm.
knowing that other person is a competent, right?
A
But
competitor, yeah.
yeah, competitor, sorry. So those are some skills that we tracked in the back end. We did not tell this upfront, hey, we're going to reward you for helping others. We never said that. But they would get a surprise badge or a reward for helping. That was a great success for us because that comes out of the blue and suddenly they feel happy that they have done something like this.
Right. So e-learning is like a straight candidate.
HR,
Okay.
the employee engagement is all about fun and engagement.
Right.
There can't be a better way to do that than gamifying it.
And how about this? If you are especially in a large organization with a long history and complex set of achievements in diverse fields, for example, maybe a company like GE comes to mind, right? It's a company with a long history, and they're into so many businesses,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, a person who joins GE would be overwhelmed with all the things there are to learn about the company, and to have that sense of belonging and pride that you belong now to this amazing group of people who have had all these phenomenal accomplishments. And I think every company which has survived has a story to tell.
Absolutely.
And I think the incoming employees especially need to be told that story, but not in the usual way of half day induction, where you basically crowd them into a room and talk to them, and they just cannot, they keep checking their watches and cannot wait to get out.
This could be easily incorporated as part of your onboarding platform. Right? So, in fact, you could save a lot of time for your employees who are like freshers or anybody, lateral hires or whoever. If you could do all these trainings before they even join, they don't come and then they don't spend like a day or 2 days, 3 days understanding all of these.
Right.
So what happened in the internship program we did was, usually there is a training for all these freshers for 3 to 6 months based on different organizations they change. So whoever was part of this was completely waived off from that training. They already did that as part of this platform.
Right.
They were billable right from day one. So it is a win-win. The organization
Right.
can completely put them into a project from day one and they are on job.
Right.
It becomes very easy.
That's that's like two birds
And
for the
another area where you can gamify in workplace is anything that needs compliance.
client's adherence. Right.
Timesheets, for example. It's a nightmare to get people to fill it, but it
Hmm.
is very, very, very critical.
Right.
Most of these HR applications and then your learning applications, onboarding, all these are like the best suited ones for gamifying.
Perfect. And we have one more question. I think it's the last question we have, which is, speaking of this question is from Somalaya, and the question is, speaking of testing, how do you think large enterprises can be confident that gamification methodologies will actually improve employee engagement? So the question, I think, is, how do you know that this is going to work before you roll it out? And should they test within small groups of employees across multiple departments to see how it makes a difference? What would you advise?
I think we already spoke about this,
We
right?
spoke
So
about it. Yeah.
an offline mix. And then, yes, I think like they've asked, you could test it within a small business unit and then see how it works and roll it out to the wider organization.
Right. Right. I think maybe um, selecting a small pilot group and running these things on them as an experiment, and maybe even like some of the research papers, they suggest that when you do these kind of one time interventions, it's a good idea to check after a while whether they have a lasting effect or whether the effect was very, very temporary and it has died out, right? So maybe 3 months later you still check with them on their sense of belonging, on what kind of behaviors they are showing at work, right? And that would give you an idea whether it's worth doing it at a larger scale.
I think continuous feedback mechanism is very important in any such application.
Right. So I think we are on time, Nitya. This was We did not plan it this way, but I think we are absolutely on time. And do you have any message for our viewers before we say goodbye?
I think you just have to give it a try and explore it. And please let me know if it works, if it does not work, or if you have any questions, you can always reach me on LinkedIn, and I'll be more than happy to help.
Well, that's a bonus. Apart from the conversation, you also get to network with the speaker.
See, I'm so passionate about this topic that anything about this excites me. It's like traveling down the memory lane for me, like traveling back 10 years and then talking about this journey, right? So it was exciting.
Perfect, Nitya. Thank you so much for sharing your learnings, your journey, and I think some of the points you made are absolutely very, very relevant for anyone who tries, yeah, enterprise gamification. So I hope this conversation was fun for you as it was for me.
You were a great host. Thank you so much for making me feel so comfortable and
No
amazing.
problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nitya.